You're now live. Thanks, Councillor Holly.
Okay, that's good. So welcome to the Over in Scrutiny Committee for Business Growth, Economy and Skills. Yet again, obviously we've had a few technological problems, but at least we're all here now, and more importantly, we're quorate. So the only apology that we've received is from Stephen Horner, and I think we've got one substitute, but I'm not sure who's actually logged in actually, and that's Councillor Dutton. So he might be still struggling. I know he had a problem yesterday. I don't know what it was. So there's no chair's announcements or urgent business. Are there any declaration of interest?
No.
Good, thank you. The minutes of the meeting held on the 10th of July. I've got a few typos that are in. They're all minor typos, which I'll pick up after the meeting. Are there any issues that people want to raise, or any major problems in terms of the minutes, or can we adopt them as a fair record of the last meeting?
Chair, can I just say, I was at the last meeting, but I'm not included on the members present.
Well, we will make sure that you are included on the members present.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah.
Okay. That's thank you for pointing that out. So in that case, we will approve the minute. I will go through with Paul after either today or on Monday, just to pick up these few typos, and they are all fairly minor, but not very easy to do it, on the screens. The other thing as well, that if you recall, those older members, when I say older, but those members have been on the committee in the past. We used to have an action log, which really recorded all the decisions that have been made, so for follow up in due course. And also sometimes they weren't necessarily decisions, but where members had asked for additional information, so it acted as a checklist to make sure that information was disseminated in due course. So I've asked Paul to update that, or rather better to start a new one off. So we'll get that done between now and the next meeting, get it updated, and any missing information, trying to get it to you, and then that'll will form part of the minutes going forwards. So the next report, the first substantive report, is the Greater Manchester Living with COVID Resilience Plan. We've actually got 3 quite lengthy reports here. So what I'm going to do, which, as you know, I don't like doing, because I like people to flow with questions. In the first instance, I'm going to restrict everybody just to one question. Together they can have a quick follow-up. But then if we're doing well on timing, then what we'll do, we'll go back and you can ask more questions. I say I hate restricting things, so I think the flow of questions is important, but I think it could well be, looking at what's in these reports, there could be some lengthy debates, because I don't know, at the end of the day, it's your meeting. The other thing I'd like to say about this report, it's already been to the Combined Authority, and it's been approved. I presume it was approved by the Combined Authority, and therefore this is more for information purposes only. Having said that, because clearly lots of things are going on, and this is a living document, observation that we can make with regards to the actual resilience plan, recovery plan, is important. And also one of the things I would like to understand, there's a lot of detail there which I didn't necessarily fully appreciate all the ins and outs, but to get a sense from Simon as to how this will develop going forwards. Obviously all 3 Over in Scrutiny committees have got an interest in this recovery plan, and is it proposed that there'll be some metrics put into the plan, so we can understand what is it going to be developing? Will there be time frames put in terms of key dates, etc.? So just a sense of how this will look, because it's not a strategy, it's a plan, and it's obviously linking the old Greater Manchester strategy, which is now finished, and the new one which will come in due course. So if you could give a preamble around that, Simon, I think that would be helpful. I might, if you like, inform people as to what sort of questions, and probably more important in some ways, observations are pertinent.
Thanks, Chair. I'll just, as you say, I'll just give a brief overview of a number of those issues and the plan as a whole, and then very much welcome questions and comments. Mike, as you say, it's been to the Combined Authority and has been improved by the Combined Authority. The plan, just let's be absolutely clear, the plan is a living document, and therefore the reason that it's here is for you to provide your views, your thoughts, your comments on it, so that actually as it evolves and develops over the coming year, your comments and thoughts can be taken into account and then incorporated as the plan evolves, and that's the way we agreed to do it. What is the plan? It's a 1-year plan. And it's a living with COVID plan. So it's not a full economic recovery plan. It's not a full plan about how we respond to COVID-19. It's very much about a plan of some early issues that have become apparent because of COVID, and that we felt that it was really important that we captured those early issues, working with the Recovery Coordination Group, to identify them, capture them, and work out what we needed to do in the next 12 months while COVID was still carrying on, in order to build the resilience of the city region. And building that resilience is part of that whole response and recovery mechanism, and actually learning the early lessons, building resilience for second waves of coronavirus or other pandemics or other emergencies, in fact, based on the lessons we've learned, was felt to be really important. Mike, as you said, it's a link between the Greater Manchester strategy that was due to be updated in June 2020, that hasn't now been updated, and that plan that will now be updated in June 2021. So it's a sort of bridge document for the next 12 months. And I'll explain a little bit about metrics in a second. There are a number in the plan, and I'll take you to page 19 of your packs. There are a number of sort of principles that we felt were really important to embed within writing the plan as overarching principles. The first really was about inequalities, and the single biggest issue that COVID has thrown bare is a raft of inequalities in Greater Manchester that I think everybody knew were there, but the COVID has, as I say, kind of shone a real light on them and laid them bare, as I say. The second area is about how we build the plan and how we move forward in working with civil society particularly, but in co-designing solutions, and actually the role of civil society in responding to coronavirus has obviously been absolutely vital. A number of the other areas there are about how do you begin to rebuild and how do you begin to build that resilience. So actually things around a confident city region, around a safe city region, around a resilient city region, and around the behaviour change that we need to see in order to restart society and the economy is hugely important. And obviously doing all of that in the context of the Greater Manchester strategy. So our long-term ambitions haven't changed particularly. How we might get to those long-term ambitions may well have changed. And I think, also recognising that we have seen substantial behaviour change and innovation during COVID and continue to do so. And it's like, how do we it's difficult to say positives when you're talking about coronavirus, but how do you capitalise on some of that innovation that's happened? How do you make sure that some of the changes we've seen around the environment and people's travel patterns, for example, in terms of walking and cycling and those sorts of issues, how do we make sure that those are maintained as we move forward? So perhaps next take you to page 24, I think it is in your agenda packs, which is what I describe as the heat map. And if there's one page that's worth looking at in the whole document, then for me it's this page, because what we've tried to do, as I say, is in the left-hand column, the column that's shaded from red to green. We've tried to look at the whole range of issues that have come up and been exposed by COVID, and they cover the whole of the Greater Manchester Strategy agenda. So we start off obviously with health impacts, particularly on BAME communities, disabled people and older people. We then go through issues about digital exclusion, which have been laid bare by COVID. Obviously huge economic impacts, and impacts on key sectors, and particularly in the cultural and hospitality and leisure sectors, impacts on key workers, how our towns and cities operate, and how they didn't operate during lockdown, and how they're now starting to re-emerge post-lockdown, and the different impact that's having across the city region in different places and in different parts of the conurbation, through to maybe some more optimistic areas around how we've shared data during lockdown and during the COVID crisis that we perhaps haven't previously been able to share, how we've emerged with this new network of community centres, and how we've actually shifted fundamentally. A lot of people were talking about the digital transformation of the economy, how actually an awful lot of that has happened very, very rapidly, and far more rapidly than we might have expected. And then on the right hand side, we've looked at a basket of issues and then looked at the basket of things that we think, and there's 30 or so of them, that we think the GM system as a whole needs to focus on within existing resources. So we're not saying we need vast amounts of new resources to do these things, but what do we need to really focus on as a system as a whole in the next 12 months if we're going to build that resilience that I've mentioned. And then the bottom part of the table basically takes each of those issues and says who's the lead organisation for pulling the system as a whole together, recognising that it's a system-wide response that's needed, and how do we? Sorry, I'm getting a lot of feedback there.
We've got a guest.
Can people hear me or not? Yep.
Yeah, can hear you, Simon. Yeah.
Thank you. I'll carry on. Yeah, so takes each of those issues and asks a particular organisation to coordinate the system as a whole to address those issues, looks at a number of the key things that need to be done to address that issue or begin to address that issue, and then looks at a range of sort of supporting measures. It's not supposed to be a comprehensive list of absolutely everything that needs to be done. It's very much a kind of flavour of the things that we need to do, and as I say, recognising that some of these things we need to do urgently and will move forward in this 12 months. Others are very much more a longer term agenda. I think the other thing, perhaps just to say, hopefully it's a helpful document in sort of kind of stating where we think we've learned those early lessons. But the Combined Authority and the Recovery Coordination Committee were particularly keen that actually it's not only about what we do in the next 12 months, it's also about how we do things in the next 12 months. And therefore the Combined Authority approved 3 recommendations. One was around the fact that in future reports would need to look at having recommendations around not only the kind of financial decisions that the CA needed to make, but also around the equalities impacts and making recommendations about the effect of every particular activity on inequalities and on the environment moving forward. So you're getting that balance between equality, environmental and financial issues in the recommendations of every single CA report moving forward. Secondly, the role of the equalities portfolio in managing those issues and monitoring them and ensuring that actually we are addressing the inequalities that we've identified in this report. And thirdly, looking at how we might be able to adopt minimum targets or standards for each of the neighbourhoods in Greater Manchester, and how doing that might well help drive Greater Manchester as a whole forward, recognising that actually inequalities in one part or one neighbourhood of Greater Manchester is a major issue for the whole of Greater Manchester, given that we operate as an integrated city region. So those three recommendations were adopted by the Combined Authority. And I think will be vital in terms of how we implement the plan as well as what the plan says. I'll finish there by saying obviously this is going to all 3 scrutiny committees, and I was yesterday at the Planning and Housing Scrutiny Committee and had a good conversation about some of the planning and housing issues that this throws up, and environmental issues, and obviously particularly today we would want to focus on the economic issues, obviously things around digital and around skills as part of that, and I'll open it up for comments at that point. Thank you.
Hi, Councillor Holly. We've got Councillor Meredith wanting to ask a question.
Mike, you're on mute.
Councillor Meredith, I've sent you live now.
Thank you. So it's just to go to the matrix that's on page 27, obviously to do with sustainable food and availability networks. Obviously the other day it was Back British Farmers Day, and I believe sometimes we do miss it out in these economy meetings. It is a big economy across the the city region as it is, especially in Rochdale. And I just wondered if there is going to be any inward investment into cooperative models, basically, so we can reduce our food wastage, especially if we don't want it going out of Greater Manchester. We want that food staying in Greater Manchester. So I just wondered, is there any scope for that moving forward? Because I just noticed there's actually nothing mentioned in the report about our farming industry within the city region.
You're live now, Simon. Thank you.
Yeah, Chair, do you want to deal with each individual question, or do you want to take a range of questions and then I'll come back on them as a group?
You're on mute, Councillor Holly. If you just unmute your microphone, please.
The answer, Simon, what I would suggest you do, answer this one first, and then after that we'll do in all together. The reason I say that, the one thing you didn't touch upon on your overview was metrics, and I think that's important, because that's where I struggle somewhere on the narrative in terms of of relative importance, priorities, timeframes, etc. So I don't want you to go through in a lot of detail, but just give a quick overview of what that is, and then we can go back to the question as per normal.
Okay, so sorry, on that point, sorry, I should have covered it. The plan is that, as I say, this is a living document, and in exactly the same way as that we used to monitor the Greater Manchester strategy, we will bring this back to the committee at least twice a year, I think is the plan at the moment. Obviously, it is only a 12-month plan, so probably twice during the year. We would both do two things. We will update on the progress with implementing each of these major deliverables, and for me it's about the spirit of have these been delivered in the way in which we think they need to be, and that's the important thing, because if we're not doing these things, then we're not building the resilience that we've said that we need to address the issues of inequality. The second thing in terms of metrics, though, is that because we're between GMSs, Greater Manchester strategies, we will continue to monitor the metrics that were in the Greater Manchester strategy previously. So alongside this document and the narrative update on how we're doing on these deliverables, you will also see the metrics that were in the Greater Manchester strategy continuing to be updated, and obviously those may then change when we get into the new Greater Manchester strategy, but at least you'll have that continuity from the old Greater Manchester strategy in terms of metrics. Okay,
that's fine. I mean, that was what my concern was, and the other part I guessed to note, as it's going to all three committees, then presumably you want focus, or in terms of feedback and questions from this committee, from the areas that we've got responsibility for, not for across the patch. I mean, we'll presumably, I don't want people touching on things that are if you like relevant to us. Like the good example would be the spatial framework, which is not our prime responsibility. It's the housing committee, but it's obviously from an economic perspective, then we have an interest in that. So I think in terms of questions, if you can bear that in mind in terms of how you're framing and which questions you're asking. So if you'd like to deal with Danny's question.
You're live now, Simon.
Yep. Sorry, thank you. I was just trying to. I've just suffered a slight internet problem there, so I'm back now. Yeah, so I think the whole issue of food industry is vital, and it's part about the overall resilience of the conurbation and overall safety of the conurbation. I mean, I know there's an awful lot of work going on, for example, in an innovative way at the University of Manchester about resilient food and resilient food networks. So I think it's absolutely happening in the conurbation. It perhaps isn't reflected in here as much as maybe it could be. So that's perhaps something we could take away and as I said, it's a living document, so it's something that we maybe can reflect in future updates. We certainly talk about the importance of the kind of food networks within Greater Manchester, but not necessarily about the food production. So maybe we'll pick that one up.
So more questions, please.
Councillor Rigby next, please, Chair.
Right, thanks. It's it's on digitalisation. I know we're doing the rollout of the high-speed broadband around the conurbation, but it's highlighting white spots. Now, they were there before, and we're getting complaints that they're still there after we start rolling this out. Last year, good connectivity was preferable. This year, it's essential. Can we do a little bit more? I mean, it says, I think in your response, a targeted plan. It's vague, to say the least. If I went back to the person with the business who can't connect and saying, we've got a targeted plan, I'm sure he'd want to know a little bit more. Thanks.
Mike, do you want me to respond to that?
Yes, yeah, let's do it that way round. I think
Okay.
Otherwise we might get lost. I mean, if we were in a room, I think I might let you take all the questions together, but just in case, I mean, with this new technology, I think it might be safer, frankly, Simon, even though less efficient.
Yeah, no, I'll do that. In terms of digital inclusion, I think there's two parts. So the targeted plan for digital exclusion is not just about connectivity. It's actually also about how people are able to access technology. So, for example, we know that you know, certainly in some of our more deprived communities, an awful lot of individuals might have access to broadband, but don't actually have the means to connect to that broadband, i.e. they may not have a machine to connect with, or indeed the costs of connecting, because they're trying to do that over 4G rather than through Wi-Fi, are prohibitive. So yeah, there's both business and individual digital exclusion that's been laid really clear through COVID, and as you said, Councillor, it's hugely important that people are able to connect digitally. So the plan covers all aspects of that exclusion, but specifically in terms of spots where you can't connect. I think there's two answers to that, and the most significant one is if there are specific examples, let us know, and we're able to then follow up with the broadband providers across Greater Manchester to see what the specific plan is for that particular area, so we can easily do that if you've got specific examples. And obviously broadband connectivity in terms of the fibre network in Greater Manchester is improving the whole time. But yeah, if there are specific examples, let us know, and we'll follow that up with broadband providers.
Thanks, sir.
Thanks, Simon. Next.
We've got Councillor Winstanley, Councillor King, and then Councillor Whitby. So Councillor Winstanley next.
Thank you, Chair. Simon, you mentioned earlier on about the adopting minimum targets and standards, which obviously the combined authority have agreed to. I was just wondering, do we know what those minimum targets and standards will look like, or what they are yet? I appreciate it's a living document and it's a 12-month plan as well. Presumably, if we were putting those recommendations in, you might have had some idea what they may look like, and once they are agreed, would we be able to see these at a future meeting, just for reference, as we're moving through the municipal year and we're dealing with various different instances of COVID as time progresses? Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Mike. Yeah, I mean, sorry. Yes, of course you can see them as they get evolved. I mean, they don't exist at the moment. The combined authority was the recommendation was, broadly, does the combined authority think it would be a good idea to have standards or targets within each of the neighbourhoods in Greater Manchester, so that actually we're not only looking at the progress of Greater Manchester as a whole, but we're actually making sure that all parts of Greater Manchester are progressing together in that journey. So the principle was approved by the combined authority. The work now needs to happen in order to work out how we do that and what those standards are. But I would imagine, just obviously, as you say, we've given it some thought. The sorts of areas we'd be looking at are the sorts of headline indicators from the Greater Manchester strategy, but applied where we can to neighbourhoods. Now, obviously, there's a data issue there, because some things you would want to measure at a neighbourhood level, you can't necessarily measure at a neighbourhood level.
Yep.
So there's going to be that balance about how can you get the data for the things that you really would want to know about. But that's the work that needs to happen, and obviously we would want to do that very closely, working with each of the districts, because there's no point in us sort of saying, well, we think these are good things to measure if they're not of interest to districts particularly. So
excellent, that's my concern. That's a good answer, Simon. Simon, on that as well, would it be helpful if when the metrics have been done in draft form, that they come to this meeting as well, for us to actually, and the other committees as well, or committees, to give you any thoughts we've got on the metrics? And I think we did that on the original delivery plan for the GMS.
Yeah, happy to do that, Chair. I think in reality, I think they will probably evolve over the next 12 months. And actually, my sense is that we will probably, this is almost about an approach to the lead into the next Greater Manchester strategy. So it's actually how do we evolve something over the next 12 months that means when we're going into the next Greater Manchester strategy, we've got a far clearer view on neighbourhood issues, and the kind of, as I say, everybody in Greater Manchester rising at the same time, rather than just looking at the conurbation as a whole, which is perhaps where some of the metrics focused on in Greater Manchester strategy this time around.
Okay, good. Next question, please.
Councillor King.
Yes, thank you, Chair. My question is somewhat related, I think, to Danny Meredith's question about localisation and retaining things locally. And it is about resilience. And the best way to be resilient, in my view, is not just to create wealth, but to try and retain that wealth. You've got to do both. We have a £62 billion economy across Greater Manchester, which is not insubstantial. It's pretty large. But how much of that is extracted through our financial system by way of interest rates and costs and charges and overdrafts and all of the rest of it? And you could win the pools or the lottery, and you could be very, very wealthy. If you don't retain that, though, if you get siphoned off, you end up being back being poor again. And I think the same thing is happening to some degree because of the huge extraction of wealth through our financial system. We don't own any of our big banks. We don't own any of our locally. We don't own any of our big insurance companies locally now that the Co-op has sold this off. So nearly all of the wealth creators are not resident locally. It's siphoned off into the City of London mostly, and from there on to the international markets. So, and I saw some figures for Wales, which has a similar, slightly larger economy than ours, but similar population. And they reckon that the wealth extraction is something like £1 billion per year. I would think that's similar in Greater Manchester, perhaps, maybe slightly smaller because our economy is slightly smaller. So I wonder if we should try to build up some kind of financial institutions and banking institutions to retain our wealth more locally, just like the old building societies did. Building societies were very localized, and they were the creators of property democracy owning. Really was building societies more than banks, because your mums and dads, our mums and dads and so on, saved with the local building societies and bought their properties through it, and they retained that wealth locally. And if you look at the number of bank branches that are closing down, and we're losing huge amount of banking experience. We used to have a fairly large financial businesses in Greater Manchester. That now is beginning to filter away as well. So I think if we should try and take command of this and create our own banking institutions and building societies and so on, again, that's a big question, but it is about retaining wealth in our fairly large £62 billion economy. Thank you.
I don't know how you answer that, Simon.
It's relevant though, I think, Chair.
I'll go and create a bank tomorrow. It's fine. Don't worry. No, I'm joking. It's really good question. You know, I think there are a number of things in the plan that begin to not to address the question in terms of banks specifically, but more generally about how do we create an economy that is, as you say, retaining wealth. So there's things in there obviously about the good employment charter and how we're therefore making sure that actually wealth is being created but retained through the way in which employment works within the conurbation. We've obviously got things in there about social value and social value within procurement, and obviously that's a hugely important part of the way in which we ensure that actually activity that's happening in Greater Manchester, and when we're issuing procurement activity through the public sector particularly, how that is then driving wealth creation and retention within the conurbation through social value. We've obviously got the work with the voluntary sector, and out with this piece of work there's obviously also the Cooperative Commission that's been happened within the conurbation about how do we create more cooperative activity within Greater Manchester, and that Cooperative Commission has now reported, and the recommendations are I think going to the Combined Authority at the end of this month actually, about how do we stimulate the cooperative activity within the conurbation, and we do have obviously a very strong financial and professional services sector within Greater Manchester, and a number of challenger banks that are being developed to the mainstream banks, some of which have got activity within the conurbation as well. So I think there are a number of things going on. I wouldn't in any way claim that was a kind of a full answer to your question, Councillor, but I think there are a number of things that are going on that are recognising this whole issue of wealth retention as a significant issue within the conurbation as well.
Can I just add to that? Actually, I think you might be surprised actually at the number of financial services and related jobs, i.e., the legal profession, accountancy, consultancy, is actually built in the city centre of Manchester in particular, but in the conurbation general, and also just outside in places like Knutsford and so on. People often live, within the conurbation. And that there are, loads and loads and loads of opportunities going forward here. I mean, I think that the thing that it's not really, it's probably alluded to in this colour chart, but the whole working plan or the way in which people work going forwards is going to be radically changing, and the current model of working in big cities, particularly in places like London, people aren't going to want to work there anymore. And and so much, there are so many opportunities in terms of people working from home. The whole thing is going to change going forward. Like I said, I can already see that from members of my family, the jobs that they do, and I think that is something that we need to grasp. It's a long-term thing, but it's to understand, and to model how things are going to change, and what there'll be risks here in terms of what they call the prep economy, of course. But there are massive opportunities here, and one thing we shouldn't forget is that if you look at the conurbation, a heck of a lot of it is a wonderful place to live in, and and all of a sudden you might find people who actually don't want to work in the centre of London, but would love to live where I represent, up in the foothills of the Pennines of North Rochdale. So, I mean, I think there's a whole, Simon was saying that there are some pluses that come out of this tragedy, and there will be more pluses coming out. And it's how we actually buy into that and get ahead of the game, really. It's a long-term thing, and it's not in a way for an answer, Simon. But if you've got any thoughts on that, I welcome them.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I mean, I think we should never underestimate the strengths that Greater Manchester does have in e-commerce, in fintech,
absolutely,
and as you say, in the financial professional services more generally. So we are strong in a lot of these areas, and actually particularly in the digital area, we have particular strengths around digital and around digital security and cyber security. So actually we are well placed to certainly to create wealth through the focus we do have on digital and digital technologies, and that does absolutely apply within the financial professional services sector as well.
Next question, please.
Councillor Whitby.
Hello, my question follows on slightly from what you've been saying about the digital offer and the digital plan, and also Councillor Rigby, and it's about the quality impact assessment that's referenced on page 25, and I wondered what the timeline was for the impact assessment to be carried out. How far a deep dive is it going to be, and can the committee see it once it's been completed? Thank you.
You're live, Simon.
Yes, sorry, I've just got bad network connection. Sorry, I'm just trying to find the specific reference on page 25.
Third bullet point down after and wider systems examples of the actions which will
Yeah, sorry.
attainment.
Yeah, so this is the equality impact assessment on the digital blueprint.
Yeah, on the delivery plan.
Yes, it's on the digital delivery plan. Yeah.
Yeah.
I will have to come back to you on that and check what the timeline is for doing that. But I have no problems in the committee seeing it at all.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next question, please.
That's the end of the questions, Chair.
Oh, goodness me, I thought there'd been loads and loads of questions. Right, well, I've got a few questions. I think the first is I guess is an observation, actually, Simon, and I think, you know, we've already touched on it. I think for going forwards, I mean, there's so much information here. A lot of it is long term, and some of it is very, very short term. And I guess what I was expecting from this document, as it's a plan, is really, you know, the breaking down in terms of what are the key things that we have to deliver, what are the nice to haves, what are the longer term things. So more broken out, you know, in terms of it. Because I actually, I'm perfectly honest, found it difficult to actually follow some of the things in there. So, you know, and you know, it's there is so much going on. There's so much detail there. Clearly, there's been a really good brainstorming exercise carried out to actually identify, you know, what was there and more than that. So I just think that going forward in terms of reporting on this, apart from obviously reporting on the metrics, it's reporting on what are the key priorities, and, you know, what are the timelines on those, and, you know, what is the progress in terms of the implementation of the various things. And also, I think the other thing is identifying more what are the opportunities. So I think, you know, that as we were alluded to in terms of how people work, that could be an opportunity. It's a threat, it could be an opportunity as well. So it's really around that, Simon, in terms of your thoughts, in terms of how this will evolve over this first year, and clearly then that will then be a short-term plan going into obviously the next strategy, which presumably is a year away.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. I think the answer to that question is, I suppose, really in a couple of different ways. But the main answer is that in heat map, so on page 24, those 30, I think it is, deliverables. We're basically saying those are things that we must deliver during this next 12 months.
Okay,
we're going to build the resilience of the conservation. Now, some of those obviously are very specific. So, you know, establish the GM Independent Inequalities Commission, for example. That's a very specific thing. You can do it. We can tick that we've done it, and that will be a fundamental. But that in itself will then come up with a load of recommendations that actually will then be implemented over the longer term. Others obviously are long-term plans already. So progress the GM Clean Air Plan, for example, it is already the environmental plan. It's already a plan to 2038. It's got a 5-year kind of specific action plan within that. But obviously what we're saying is we need to make sure that we do deliver the actions that we said we needed to in the first 12 months. So some of them are very much long term. Some of them are specific actions we need to take this year that will then influence the long term. But what we're saying is on all of those 30 things, we have to make progress this year if we are genuinely going to build the resilience of the city region, such that if we had a further pandemic or other major emergency, we would be in a stronger place to respond than we were before COVID happened.
I mean, that's an important point you're making. You know, and I have to say, in terms of if there were to be, if you like, another pandemic, and I think it's learning from that. Well, the point I was trying to get at really there is that you're absolutely right. So some of the things have to be delivered quickly, but I was, you know, but some of them were part of a longer term plan. So it's just understanding what bit of that has to be done, let's say, within the next year, and what is going to be, you know, ongoing afterwards. So which is really for a future iteration
Yes.
of this reporting. The other thing, which it goes back to the point I made before in terms of how the economy generally is changing, is, as I understand it, the Greater Manchester Spatial Framework is now being relaunched again. But all that's happening with COVID, as I say, could change radically the way in which people work, the way therefore which we need transport, the way therefore where people will want to live, etc., etc. And the original plans, I understand that it was temporarily withdrawn because the economic assumptions had moved on. The economic assumptions may well have moved on again now. We don't obviously know because, if it's a V-shaped recovery, we may be back to where we were previously. What is planned for, the economic modelling to be done before the GMSF is approved? And whilst obviously we haven't got responsibility for the spatial framework, it clearly, impacts on, or could impact on, the work we are responsible for, which is the economic growth of the conurbation.
Yep. Thank you. A nice meaty question there. I think a couple of points to make on that. I mean, obviously, as you say, the scrutiny of the spatial framework will be done by the Planning, Housing and Environment Scrutiny Committee, but obviously the economy is part of this committee's work. I think it's really genuinely too early to say how the economy will develop, how it will develop in terms of recovery, and whether there are any long-term implications of COVID for the economy. And I certainly don't believe that we should be producing new forecasts right now, because I think you can't forecast in terms of how things might have changed. I think it's easier to say that there will be disruption in the short term if you're looking at over a very long-term period, the sort of 20-year plus period. Then actually I think you can begin to say things with some more certainty, and actually an awful lot of what COVID has done to the economy, potentially, and I do use that word advisedly, potentially in the longer term has accelerated trends that were already there. So an awful lot of the digitalization trends, for example, actually, we were planning for, substantially more digitalization in the economy over the next 10 years, for example. Actually, a lot of that's been just rammed into 6 months or so, and we've made a big leap forward rather than kind of gradual progress. I think one of the things the spatial framework will try to do, it will try to have information about the assumptions that are now within the spatial framework based on COVID, and it would try to maintain as much flexibility as possible, because for me right now flexibility is the key, because nobody can predict with any certainty exactly how things will progress, and therefore keeping a flexible approach has to be the right way of moving forward. We would want to be planning for large amounts of growth, because that's what we wanting to be seeing, because we want the economy to be prosperous and thrive. But equally, you don't want to be planning for growth that then doesn't happen, and therefore that flexibility is the key for me.
Yeah, you use exactly the word that I would use, Simon, flexibility, and I'm glad that's your response, actually. And I'm not, by the way, for the avoiding doing any reforecast at this point in time. You're right, there's too much uncertainty around the place, absolutely. And you guys have got a difficult job to do as it is, with all the things that are changing all the time. And I really do sympathise, what we've got, but also applaud you in terms of what has been achieved both here and in other authorities. So, what you're saying is what I wanted to hear, basically, that the flexibility is there, and once you've got a clear view as to what's happening and how that could impact on the spatial framework, that's good to hear. Because the other thing as well is what we don't know is with Brexit, when that finally happens, what's that going to do to the economy? So, and a good example there would be, and in fact, as a result, probably more, not so much of Brexit, but of COVID, will be supply chains and how they can be changing, and how all of a sudden, you know, that some of the old manufacturing companies that we used to in Greater Manchester might actually return. Who knows? Let's be half full, eh?
And I think, Chair, the other point just to raise on that is obviously, you know, we may well not know or get that certainty about how things have ultimately been affected by COVID for two or 3 years potentially even.
Absolutely.
And therefore, actually, what we're saying is that you need to plan. You need to continue planning. You need to have a bold plan. You need to build that confidence by having a plan. And therefore, now is the right time to have a plan. But that plan needs to be as flexible as possible to allow for what might happen in the future.
Correct. Absolutely. It's not written in tablets of stone. I couldn't agree more with you. So, well, thank you for all those.
Chair, we've got another 2 people wanting to ask quick questions.
Right.
If that's okay.
By
We've got
all means.
Rigby and Councillor Hume. So, Councillor Rigby, if you can put your camera on, please.
Yeah, it's just a quickie. It's on the Good Employment Charter. I mean, it's a brilliant idea, but it's only as good as its members. And I know quite a few signed up as supporters in the initial tranche. How many of them's converted to full-blown members? And I'm just wondering whether we could break that information down to the districts. I don't know whether that's possible. Thanks.
Yeah. Thanks. I'm going to ask one of my colleagues, John Rathmell, who's also on the meeting this morning, to come in on that, because he has been very closely involved with the Employment Charter and may well have the data, or certainly will be able to provide you with the data. So, John, do you want to come in on that one?
Yeah, thanks, Simon, and hello, Councillor Rigby. I know we had some very helpful discussions and input from you and colleagues when we were designing the charter and putting it together. So we can provide a more detailed update on progress if that's helpful. I know that the new Good Employment Charter unit that's based in the Growth Company has a lot of material around this, but in high level terms, so. The number of supporters who signed up, that's the first tier of the charter. There's just over 200 employers at the moment, covering around about 200,000 employees across Greater Manchester. So it's reached a good scale very quickly. And then on the membership tier, so that's those employers who've reached high standards across all the criteria, as you may remember. We've set those deliberately at a high level, and therefore kept the membership, the number of members down to a very exclusive group. And we've just approved I think there were 7 originally, or 6 originally. We've just approved the next 10, but deliberately trying to keep that as set the standards high and have a small number. But as I say, very happy to provide a more detailed update from the unit if that's helpful.
Thanks for that, John.
Thanks. So next was Joanne.
Yeah, Councillor Hughes.
Thank you, Chair. And it was just you partly asked my question, Chair. Actually, it was in regards to the resilience of the document and kind of going forward, because obviously there's 4 different levels of restrictions in Greater Manchester at the moment that we're all under. Yeah. So I do think that obviously it's a really rapidly changing situation and things aren't looking great at the moment. But I suppose in terms of, there are sort of 3 key things. You mentioned one of them, Brexit, but there's also the end of the furlough scheme and the end of the stopping no-fault evictions. And I suppose, I guess those are kind of like set in stone dates, though I know Brexit can be flexible with dates. But those set in stone dates, I suppose, what is the kind of key? Because I was looking through the document and I suppose there isn't those specifically addressing what at those moments what's going to be happening when, you know, there's dates we know are coming up, rather than things that are kind of live issues that may flare up or reduce as a problem.
Good question.
Yeah, thanks for that. I think resilience runs through the whole document, and actually the key and one of the difficulties in writing the document was actually the fact that COVID is still very much ongoing, and in normal emergencies you would not write your sort of recovery plan or your resilience plan until the emergency was over, and yet we decided it was still right to do that because we wanted to capture these early lessons. So I think, in writing the document, absolutely recognise that Brexit is still ongoing. Sorry, Brexit that COVID is still ongoing, as is Brexit actually, but there we go. The COVID is still ongoing, and we needed to be very sensitive to that, and therefore you can't be absolutely certain how things are going to pan out over the coming months. As part of the response mechanisms around COVID, we do have an economic resilience group, and that group is looking at some of those major issues you looked at in terms of some of the key dates, in terms of what might happen to the labour market particularly, and obviously we've got the skills section coming up in a second, about some of those key dates. Obviously very worried about the end of October as a date when not only does the furlough scheme end, but also we've then obviously got the start of some of the debt having to be repaid that companies have borrowed from government. We've then obviously got Brexit dates, as you've got the no-fault eviction date. So we're monitoring very closely these sort of key dates and the impact on the economy and on the labour market, particularly as these things progress, and through the economic resilience group, looking at how we may need to adapt our responses as those things evolve.
That's the end of the questions.
Oh, okay. Well, Simon, thank you for that. It's very interesting, and clearly a lot of thought and work's gone into this. So it's it's as I say, I don't relish your task with all the things that are changing all the time, and it's keeping alert and being flexible. So it's and let's hope that things improve generally for us. On this report, as the report's actually been approved by the combined authority, I think we just note this report, and then the points that we raised in terms of thoughts and recommendation, if those could be captured together and put down, if you like, as a recommendation for consideration by the combined authority, and then obviously we look forward then, Simon, to further updates and iterations as we go through the year. And I think it is important we actually see the progress against, if you like, what we're trying to achieve, twice in the next 6 months, I guess. So are we happy with that? Okay, good, thank you. So the next report is the Greater Manchester International Strategy Refresh. And John Rathbell is going to introduce this report.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So as the report sets out, the current international strategy was agreed in 2017 and ran for 3 years. And a lot has clearly changed in that time. The UK leaving the European Union, the impact of increasing tension between China and the West. And the election of the mayor as well, which had a bigger impact than we expected initially in terms of engagement with ambassadors, consul generals, even the Irish Prime Minister came for a visit. So that I think has given a sort of a focal point for some of the city regions' international engagement, probably because the mayoral model is one that's very familiar in the rest of the world, but has been less familiar, at least outside London, in the UK. So we found that other countries sort of look to the city region mayor as an obvious point of engagement. So as I say, the strategy was the 2017 strategy was due to finish this year. So we'd started some background work at the end of 2019, early 2020 on the update to the strategy, particularly engaging with key stakeholders in this area. So businesses with strong international links, districts with their own relationships with around the world, and for that matter, individual communities with strong links with the rest of the world. The work of Midas and Marketing Manchester, who obviously play a very significant role in developing those, particularly inward investment and the visitor economy, the universities with international students. So we were in the process of doing the analysis and engagement around that. And then COVID arrived, and obviously had a very significant impact on all of these issues. So we paused for a couple of months, and then in May picked the refresh up again with an initial assessment of some of those impacts of COVID, and particularly on travel, obviously, but also on some of the trade disruption that's caused, and a massive impact at on Manchester Airport. And one thing that's clear is it's going to take some time to really understand those the consequences of those impacts, and also alongside that we're in a period of transition with the European Union. We don't know where the new trade deals are going to reach, if anywhere, if at all, in the new year. The US election as well is adding a lot of uncertainty, and therefore, rather than trying to put in place a new long-term strategy, we thought that the best approach would be to complement the one-year plan that we've just been discussing, and have a one-year refresh of the international strategy as well, which looks at some of the immediate priorities and responses which are needed to COVID on the international side, but also then means that that in a year's time we can return to it again when we may be clearer on some of those longer-term impacts of COVID, but also we can refresh we do a full refresh of the strategy at that point, alongside the Greater Manchester strategy, which we're expecting will be updated after the mayoral election. So this is really a sort of a development of the previous strategy rather than any new approach. You'll see in the paper there's a sort of updated strategic framework which focuses on the core priorities, which I think have stayed consistent, but around trade, investment, research and innovation, international students and the visitor economy, but also separating out from those some of the enablers which allow those to be delivered, and particularly connectivity, city region diplomacy, which is that engagement with other global city regions, and also global perception and reputation, which is clearly so important, particularly for the visitor and the international student economy. So that's been our approach and the direction of our thinking. The draft strategy as it stands is attached to the paper as well, so which we're looking to take to the combined authority. So yeah, very much any comments or suggestions welcome.
Any questions or thoughts?
Yes, we've had questions from Councillor Meredith and Councillor Susan Howard. So if we put Councillor Meredith first.
Happy for me to start, sorry.
Yeah,
sorry, thank you very much, Chair. So on page 84, obviously we've seen the local partners that are involved there. The first question is why has Rochdale been left out of this? The second question is, when I've spoken to officers about why Rochdale's not on this report, I've been told that officers have not been engaged with at Rochdale Council either. So can I ask that, why is that? My third question is about this is, what is Rochdale actually paying into Midas right now? And what are we actually getting out of it? So it's like you're saying, I know originally I think it was Manchester, Trafford and Salford were engaged with it. And then we got told that we had to join it to obviously build this Greater Manchester economy, basically, over the international stage. So the thing is I'm not sure what Rochdale is actually getting out of this right now. And I am going to be a bit rude by saying this. I do think we are being ripped off a little bit. So I would like to see that answered. And I'm going to say this directly to the chair. I think as well, if it's great to see case studies actually in there, but it would be great to see what we're actually like the different boroughs are getting out of this. And I think this does need to be scrutinised more in the future. Thank you very much.
Can I just add to that? I mean, you're all aware that I'm also a Rochdale councillor, so I've got a vested interest in the answers to Danny's question.
Thanks very much, Chair. So on those 2 points, so we did approach every district to engage in this, but didn't receive responses from every district, and have made a number of attempts. I mean, I think that's for quite understandable reasons, which is that I know that there's, particularly during the COVID crisis, there's been a massive impact on districts, and therefore probably engaging on some of these international issues hasn't been top of anyone's agenda. But I can assure you that every single district was approached to take part and provide input, and I can certainly find out sort of where that approach went in Rochdale as well. On the funding of Midas and Marketing Manchester, I mean, as I'm sure you'll know, those are delivered by the Growth Company, and I wouldn't claim to understand the sort of the full finances behind that, but my understanding is it's a combination of there's private sector funding goes into those organisations, and then there's funding from the combined authority, which generally comes out of the combined authority. I'm not aware that that districts make a direct contribution in, although I say I could be wrong about that. But I'm happy to try and find out a bit more about where that funding goes and come back.
Danny, are you happy with that answer?
I am happy with that answer, but I do believe that it needs more scrutiny in the future. Thank you.
Yeah, well, I would agree with it, but also, I mean, I would be interested to know, so there's clearly a difference of opinion here in terms of what level of engagement there's been with Rochdale, and I think bearing in mind, if you like, the opportunities that there are in Rochdale in terms of the land that's available for inward investment, etc., then I think it's important that all boroughs are engaged. But I take your point, but sometimes there's practicalities, particularly given where we are at the moment. So if you could just find out for Danny and myself where this has got to and what's happening, perhaps it could facilitate, if you like a meeting and get some input in there, which might be helpful for the next iteration of the report.
Just a quick comment, sorry, Councillor Holly, as well. I did speak to the Director of Economy at Rochdale, who did actually say that there has been no engagement. So obviously there is a conflict there of what's actually happened in this process. It's like Rochdale does have a big manufacturing industry, you know, within our borough. So it would be a shame for us to be left out of that international market.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Susan.
Councillor Howarth.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. I want to ask about the part of the report, two parts actually, that talk about the attractiveness of Greater Manchester to academics and to overseas companies, for example. Grateful for a view on this, which is slightly different than some have said. So one of the side effects to the new home working may be that attracting people out of a life in the south of daily commuting to London has been a strength here in Greater Manchester, if you see where I'm coming from. Now we have home working, though, people may think that they can do London just 2 or 3 days a week and work from home on the other days. So in somewhere like North Bedfordshire or wherever, where they do their longer commuter distances, may London then become more attractive again? So, you know, I'm raising that as that absolutely came to mind when I was thinking about these matters that you've put down about attracting people to Greater Manchester. And I want to link that to the other area of the report. The report clearly says this: it is very difficult to quantify the results of the internationalisation strategy. I read that to mean making clear the effectiveness or not. And then I started to think, well, is there no modelling in the UK or elsewhere, no modelling that can be used and applied to do this type of assessment work? And I felt like those two things did link in a way, because the first point I raised is quite a big, what you like call jobs work issue. Thank you, John.
John?
Yes, thank you very much for that. Sorry, just coming off mute. So yes, I mean, I think the attractiveness of Greater Manchester as a destination is, I mean, for for work as well as visit. I think it links up with the discussion we were having around the previous item, and I think that we're so early into the economic impacts of COVID that it's hard to assess quite how those working patterns are going to change in the long term, and how much of this is a temporary effect and how much there are longer term transitions. But it's something we're thinking about, both in the context of the international strategy, but also the wider work that Simon was describing as well. I think one of the advantages of Greater Manchester over London and the southeast that is property prices. So even where people can work from home in the southeast, there's still a quality of life issue. But also so some of that pull that was bringing people to Greater Manchester before the COVID crisis hit, I think will continue. On the second one about the trying to assess the impact. So we've picked out in some places in the strategy sort of the impact or the developments as far as we're aware across each of the priorities, where they can be numerically captured. I think one of the challenges with the strategy is that actually it's an agenda that's delivered by a whole range of partners across the city region. So it's partly about how the universities engage with international students. It's about how the airport operates its individual businesses. So the strategy then becomes as much a sort of coordination exercise of bringing different parties with different priorities around a similar set of priorities, as much, if not more so, than any actual sort of direction coming from a combined authority level. So I think that's one of the challenges about then trying to measure that effect. But we have tried to pick out as far as we're able things like the growth in the number of international students, the number of projects being delivered, the sort of new jobs. But I think the difficult bit is trying to then distill out of that how much of that has been as a result of this strategy and how much would have come about in other ways, given you've got so many different actors in that space. But we will have a look at see if there are other examples from elsewhere of where people are trying to make that distinction as well.
Any more questions?
Councillor Winstanley.
Michael?
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, John, thanks for your overview of the report. And you mentioned the impact that the directly elected mayors had on, that business opportunities, especially with liaising with different countries and stuff like that. And I noticed on page 52 as well, you highlighted about the mayoral-led Team Manchester mission to the US, China and India, and there's some of those pipeline projects in there. I mean, given the fact that pre-COVID, people just jump on a plane and fly out to wherever they was going to do business, and it is obviously easier to do business face to face and sell a place when you're actually with someone. So what thoughts have we got in terms of how we can utilise the opportunities, I suppose, from a digital perspective that might be more available now than there was before as we move forward? I mean, hopefully we can get to the situation again where we can do business face to face, but in the short to medium term, have we got any sort of like plans, ambitions around how we can keep that on the back burner? And are these pipeline projects that you mentioned in the report still very much on the boil, as it were? Thank you.
Thank you. That is something we're thinking about at the moment as we sort of try and wrestle with the technology, but also take advantage of some of those opportunities. And so yes, that pipeline is still something we're focusing on. In fact, one of the ways that we're trying to develop this is that there was a proposal around doing a trade mission to Ireland as a close trading partner, and also working with Liverpool City region to do that as well, given there's clearly interconnection there. Now, I think we'd have, if COVID hadn't arrived, then we'd have been that would probably have happened this autumn. Clearly, it's not going to happen. So what we're looking at the moment is, can you do a virtual trade mission, which is set up meetings with political leaders and businesses in Dublin and elsewhere, but do it through this sort of format rather than doing it face to face. And I mean, I think there could be challenges, as you say, about it can often be easier doing business face to face than through this sort of mechanism. And given we're in uncharted territory, it's a bit difficult to know how that will work in practice. But happy to report back on the success or otherwise of that as we work those out.
Any more questions?
Councillor King.
Yeah. Yes, thank you, Chair. John, you mentioned a couple of places in your report about FDI and FCI and so on, which is fine. And I think something like £4 billion coming to Greater Manchester recently from China and the United Arab Emirates and various other places. And you mentioned in passing, I think, about onshoring, but just that, and you don't seem to sort of go beyond that. And yet more and more countries are thinking about onshoring some of the jobs that they have exported over the past couple of decades in particular. And I just wondered if that should be part of our strategy. And in particular, maybe we should look at particular types of product that we want to onshore. An example might be, as was highlighted during COVID, about PPI shortage. We just couldn't manufacture it, basically, and we were supposed to be a manufacturing nation, for goodness sake. And we took an RAF cargo plane off to Turkey and picked up tens of thousands of items and found out that they weren't usable. Yeah. So I think maybe we should target what we want to bring back into our economy. There won't be another crisis coming along sometime soon. It may not be exactly COVID, but something else. And I think we should be a bit better prepared in terms of our ability to provide for ourselves, at least in an emergency setting. So maybe we should begin to target on that a little bit more. And the other thing about, in a small way, on diplomacy, nearly all local authorities have twin towns, and they've had very good relationships with them for quite a long time, mainly cultural, educational, maybe, and so on. But maybe that could be a link that we could expand a bit, where there are already fairly strong connections. They are available, waiting for that to be explored, maybe. Thank you.
John?
Yes, thank you. No, that's yeah, very good point about onshoring. I think you're right. That is something we can probably make more of, and it's going to be one of those issues. It's difficult to show how it's difficult to know how strong that effect is going to be and how sort of economic incentives are going to change over the next few months, not least because of some of the issues I mentioned around the impact of COVID, but also the new treaties following our departure from the EU and those relationships between China and the West. But no, I think you're right. That is a gap. We'll have a look at expanding more on that, and likewise on diplomacy and twinning. So that is something which has come out of the conversations with individual districts, and I think so, some of those some of those are some of the existing twinning arrangements that are in place. Some are more live than others, let's say, in the sense that the amount of resource and effort and relationships that go into that. But no, I think that's something else we can build in as well. So we'll pick that up.
Can I just add to that? I mean, I'm glad you raised that point, Joe. I'm a great fan of restoring manufacturing into this area. I mean, I can remember when I moved up to this neck of the woods from South Wales in 1973, and the level of manufacturing, top quality manufacturing in the area, was absolutely astounding, and we've lost it all. So manufacturing is in our DNA, and we really ought to seize this opportunity. And I know it's a wider thing for the government generally, but I really believe there should be opportunities there, and it ranges from where we don't want to be in a situation where certain strategic products are manufactured abroad, but it's also down to we've got a vibrant car industry in terms of supply chains. There must be opportunities there. So I think it's something we should be looking at. The only thing is, of course, in your 1 year plan, which is absolutely the right thing to do in my judgment, because there's so many things changing at the moment, not just COVID. It's right to do for 1 year. The reshoring does take time, So that's a more of a longer term.
Yes.
Or medium term.
We have to start somewhere, though, Chair.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And certainly, I mean, PPE is probably the best example of the lot, actually.
Yes.
You make a really valid point there. So, anything? I don't know if anything you want to add to that, John, or we no.
No, well, largely just to agree, but but on this point about sort of reshoring taking time, whilst we're doing a 1-year plan, we're also trying to keep a sort of a long-term view to this.
Sure.
Whilst the tactics might change, let's say, over the coming months, and we'll have to adapt to all the various impacts we've been discussing. Actually, a lot of these are based on long-term relationships and long-term investments, and therefore trying to keep a steady sense of priorities and a long-term view on those, even whilst shifting in the short term to cope with some of those impacts is a balance we're trying to strike. But no, we'll bring that into the strategy.
Great, thank you. Any more questions?
Yeah, a final question, Chair, from Councillor Hume.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Chair. I suppose my question is in regards to the kind of geopolitical situation, but specifically around China and the kind of, so obviously in the report 30% of our foreign students are from China, and with the recent kind of tensions over the extradition thing with Hong Kong and the Huawei situation, we have sort of seen them threaten to take away, to sort of restrict their students coming to Britain. And I suppose as well with China, the kind of human rights violations that are currently taking place, both in Hong Kong and with the Uyghur people especially. I suppose is it kind of that is going to be a real source of tension going forward over the next decade or so, I think. And I suppose, what are we kind of factoring that into our future, how we negotiate with China and kind of how we speak to them? Do we raise at all the kind of issues that there are, clearly the moral issues there are at the moment, and also kind of from Greater Manchester's point of view, are we kind of thinking, actually, if that is an avenue that gets shut down, what are we going to be doing? Because we don't want to become over-reliant on a country like where we got those tensions building, I guess, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So I think on the sort of the wider point about the relationship between the West and China and how that develops, I think I mean clearly there's Greater Manchester has had a strong relationship with China and cities within China over the recent past. I'm sure that will be something that leaders pick up in their discussion when this goes to them, and they'll be thinking about how they sort of how that might develop and where and how relationships will work in future. Particularly on the point about international students and Chinese students going to Greater Manchester, I think the universities are in the process at the moment of finding out exactly how many international students are going to arrive this year. But I think that it's been notable from those conversations have shifted over the summer. So or back in the spring, I know there was a lot of concern that numbers would at the universities would be down significantly, and that would have a very large financial impact with significant knock-on implications for them as institutions. However, I think they've become more cautiously optimistic over the summer, and one of the impacts I understand, particularly around Chinese, is because it's the Chinese students are now much more reluctant to go to the United States and to Australia. More of them have been looking to apply to the UK. So certainly last heard there was sort of cautious optimism that those numbers would remain reasonably high in this academic year, and therefore some of the big financial implications that the universities were worried about back in the spring, it may not be as serious as they looked at that point.
Just to note there, John, as well. I mean, it's interesting as well that with the US election coming up, both contenders have got the same attitude towards China, and therefore, the point that you make about potentially the US being a more attractive market for students compared to the UK generally. I think that is a moot point actually. So I think so. Let's see what happens. But again, it's uncertainty. So are there any final questions, or should we move on to the next report?
Questions, Chair.
Great, thank you. Well, in that case, I think we just note the report, and obviously there's comments and observations we made, and you know, obviously we look forward in about a year's time to seeing an update, a proper update of the strategy, and it could well be completely different from what we've got at the moment. Who knows? It may be the same. So much uncertainty. That's fine. So we're on to the next report now, and that's a report. I'll check my crib sheet. It's the I've lost it. Oh yeah, there we are. Joe Marsh is going to present the report. There's obviously the work and skills recovery update, and I believe that Sean. So is Sean Fielding here as well?
Yes, Councillor Fielding's arrived, Chair.
See you, Sean. Great. Welcome,
Yes.
and thanks for, as ever, making the effort of supporting the officers in the section area that you're responsible for.
Thanks, Chair. No problem. I don't know if you saw my comment in the chat. I was actually on the bus network subcommittee this morning, and
sorry, you're on mute.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you. Yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. I'll carry on. No, I've had to jump across from another committee. Normally that's in Friends Meeting House, and the walk is a short one anyway. But I didn't have to move at all this morning to get to the Scrutiny Committee, which is a positive. Anyway, I think it's really timely that this item's come into scrutiny now to allow members from all of the boroughs and the parties represented in the city region to really sense check the huge amount of work that's gone on so far and give a view on whether we are doing the right things for what we expect to be coming, as we've seen infection rates are beginning to climb again and furlough as well is winding up. But it is an enormous amount of work that the team have undertaken. As this is a live event, it's not possible to put the slides that have the details of what we've been undertaking. You have got them in your pack, but I can reassure members that might not have been useful to do anyway, as the slides are so detailed and carry so much content that it would have been difficult to follow in a presentation format for those that are watching. That's not a criticism of the team's PowerPoint skills, but more an indication of the volume and intensity of activity being undertaken. So before I bring Gemma in, I'll just give some context, and then the detail can come from Gemma. But COVID has caused an unprecedented slowdown in the economy and a collapse in demand, particularly in the services sector. It's triggered and accelerated structural changes in the economy, the biggest example being remote working like this. And in turn, that means that there are huge risks associated as furlough winds up. Put simply, there's a huge risk that furlough is artificially keeping lots of people employed in roles that no longer exist as the economy has changed around us during lockdown. In common with most recessions, we also know that young people will be disproportionately hit by this one. This is because there's a greater proportion of young people employed in sectors like non-essential retail and hospitality, which closed down. And whilst we've seen significant growth in the economy based on the figures announced this morning, the growth itself is spread unevenly, and the overall economy, of course, is only still recovered to 2013 levels. We also don't know what provision to support those who can't work if their businesses are forced to close again as part of any further lockdown measures that there's going to be. And of course, we've seen further lockdown measures in Bolton, and we might see them in other parts of Greater Manchester with the figures changing. That's the doom and gloom, which is very real, and it can't be underestimated. But you'll be pleased to hear that we do have a plan to mitigate these challenges as much as possible here in Greater Manchester. Shortly after the crisis hit, we very quickly stood up and increased the frequency of meetings of the Employment and Skills Advisory Panel, which is where we engage directly with employers, training providers and the education sector. This has been hugely important in providing intelligence on what is happening in the economy, where the current challenges are, where the future challenges are likely to come from, and also what support can be offered by our partners. This has been integral to developing what we believe is the right tailored offer for young people, the right measures to attempt to stabilise the apprenticeship market, and the correct offer for the furloughed who may or may not return to their original jobs. Of course, even prior to the COVID crisis, Greater Manchester faced huge challenges in terms of inequalities anyway, And so it's also been important not to lose sight of the reality that those who we were previously focusing targeted help towards are in even greater need of support now. And external to all of this, there's been a string of government announcements too of various schemes to support employment and skills, which the team have been really adept at picking up and adapting to Greater Manchester to make sure that we get the most out of them and that their impact is meaningful for GM residents. These include Kickstart, Working Well Light, apprenticeship grants and much more, and Jem will go into detail on those. In short, it's a huge challenge, but an enormous amount of work has been undertaken, and massive credit must go to the team for the sheer volume and intensity of the response that they have stood up in an incredibly short space of time. So I'll stop there. I'll hand over to Gemma, who will take Scrutiny through the detail of many of the things that I've referenced and many more which you'll see in the slides that are in your pack. So thank you very much, Councillor Holly.
Can I just jump in and just say one thing? I thought this report was absolutely outstanding. It's delivered what a report of this type should deliver. I was particularly pleased that you actually looked at scenario analysis, because we've all said in the earlier reports today things are changing all over the place. But at least you've looked at what the opportunities are, and not just the doom and gloom, also the upside as well, with the holiday recovery, i.e. V-shaped rather than L-shaped. So it's a great report, and I took a lot of encouragement from what you're doing, as in this report, and clearly there's been a lot of work's gone into it. So so many thanks, and if you could pass on my thanks, to your team of creating under difficult circumstances and worked very, very hard. So Gemma, do you want to say anything now? Presumably you want to go through the details on the report, and then we'll take questions.
Thanks, Gemma. You're live now.
Okay, thank you, and thank you for those comments as well. I will certainly pass them on to the team. So yeah, I mean the report itself, the way that we've structured the presentation and the work that Sean talked about of the Employment and Skills Advisory Panel, is we really took a look at what can we do as Greater Manchester, because I think that was really critical. We have lots of programmes at our disposal in terms of Working Well, the adult education budget, and just the enormity of the partnership work, I think, with local authorities, with businesses, growth company, chamber, schools and colleges that all sit around that table. And I think that's, I mean, I would like to take the credit, obviously, but I can't. The way that partnership has stood up and adapted and broken down barriers has been phenomenal during this time. Good. So one of the biggest changes that we looked at, and obviously the report kind of goes into it on page 86, we started to look at people and business as opposed to what can the skills system do and what can the work system do? Because actually what we have learned, and you will learn obviously in your areas, is that people need lots of things. They need lots of support. They need a bag of tricks to help them in this time. They don't just need a qualification, for example. So we started to break it down. So as Sean said, looking at how people were kind of disproportionately disadvantaged and what could we do. So that's why we sectioned it off between the young people. Apprentices we thought was still very, very key in this, and not to kind of put it in the young person or the old person. Furloughed, obviously, as Sean said, is a huge new group of individuals that are going to fall out of that and potentially need retraining. Then we had the retraining, reskilling, the newly unemployed, and then the longer term unemployed, because we, as Sean said, we had inequalities and issues before. That's why we had things like work and health, and that's why we did what we did with adult education budget. What we can't do is lose sight of that, and I think that's what this has allowed us to do, is to really kind of pivot what we've got and support those that need it most, but with an eye on the future, as you've so eloquently said, Chair. And then we also said, actually, what is the business response? So all of the points that came through within the recovery plan around resilience, what businesses are doing, how businesses are growing, because some are growing, it isn't all doom and gloom. But how do we match that? How do we start to think about those people that are coming out or need retraining or are leaving college, leaving university. How do we get to them, and how do we start to tell them about the growth of Greater Manchester? And also, I mean, we coined a phrase about rise of the key worker. You know, let's not underestimate, we used to call them low paid, low skilled, and actually they kept our economy going throughout this. So what we should be shouting about that, and we should be creating pathways into that, and we should be having very different conversations with our residents about the jobs that are out there and the sectors that are recruiting. So pages 93 and 94 just kind of highlight some of that work that the team and the partnership, and this isn't just the CA, this is everybody around the table really has actually managed to do. So I'll just pick out a few that probably are relevant. So under the young person, we are creating a young person guarantee, and this will come back, I think, to Scrutiny. It's been led by Diane Medall, but that is a kind of longer term guarantee. And actually, how do we support our young people in the future? But actually, during the COVID, we set up a technology fund. So we got 500 bundles of kit and equipment and connectivity out to the young people across your areas, and every area was covered in that. We launched the Skills Capital Round 3. We managed to finalise during that time. So that meant that every area in Greater Manchester, every college has now received some Skills Capital. We also managed to get some grants to our providers and our colleges to help them, and our local authorities, to help them with adaptations within their space, to provide digital inclusion and kit to the residents of Greater Manchester as well. We've worked really closely on the furloughed with the Chamber and the Learning Provider Network and the colleges and the Growth Company. So there's like a one-stop shop now about Employ GM. So you can go and find those training courses relevant to the jobs. Apprenticeships, we've really targeted those reducing barriers, and we've managed to support partners and local authorities to do some programs about removing those barriers and trying to stimulate the demand, which is, you know, absolutely critical at this time. I think it's worth saying in the reskilling and retraining, we managed to move about £4 million worth of adult education budget to target specific sectors and specific people with specific providers, which is phenomenal. We supported all of our providers, both colleges and independent training providers, to keep going. So we moved our payment models very, very quickly to support them so that they didn't have cash flow problems, because the last thing we wanted to do was for all of our providers to go to the wall, and then when we come out of COVID, nobody would then be able to support anybody with work and skills. And then working with our work and health programme to kind of support, do welfare calls, to pivot the work that they are doing, to continue to check in with all of those residents and continue to work and actually support them. So just a phenomenal, just a snapshot there on 2 slides really about the amount of work. And then I am conscious of time, Chair, but I think it's useful to understand, as Sean said, then obviously government produced its jobs plan, and thankfully it fit into the boxes that we had said around young people and apprentices and furloughed. And we've been grappling with this within, what does this mean within a local area? And I think the biggest thing to talk about here, people will have seen the announcement of Kickstart, which is, for those that remember, what we had hoped for would have been an adaptation of the Future Jobs Fund that we had back in the day. Actually, this has now been set more as a national scheme, so GM continues to lobby, but that is for 16 to 24-year-olds on universal credit, the creation of a 6-month job. But the difference with this is that employers can go directly to Job Centre Plus and DWP, or they can work through what's called intermediaries, so people like the Growth Company, like the Chamber, like the Colleges Group, bringing together smaller organisations, SMEs, to stimulate those jobs. But I think the Scrutiny panel here, what we are very keen about is the quality of those jobs and also the longevity of them. So what we are, what we took to the Employment and Skills Advisory panel that got agreement yesterday was the setting up of a Kickstart board, potentially chaired by the co-chair of the LEP, So to make sure it's kind of business focused, but all of those intermediaries that want to be part of the GM principles, what we would expect, would sit around that. Because actually at the minute, because if it's a national programme, we've got no way of knowing, we don't know who's going on it, we don't know the names, we don't know how to support them. So we're really trying to do as much as we can across Greater Manchester in that space. There's other bits in there around grants for apprentices, so we're looking at how to target that, because again, the disincentives in the system for businesses is very confusing. You know, why would I take on an apprentice if I can get a 6-month job paid for? So actually getting some really clear messages out to employers, working very closely with Job Centre Plus around things like sector-based work academies. How do we use the knowledge and intelligence that we are gathering from our businesses, from our local areas, to map that and to start to create, if we know somebody is going to fall out of a business, how do we start to kind of target them with some of the provision and move them back into work? So in effect, stemming the flow onto benefits. We've done some huge work around our adult education budget. We've got Fast Track, which is a government funded scheme, and that really is about linking businesses, telling about the actual job, not the skills gap, the actual job, and then working with providers to fill that gap. And because of the success of the rounds 1 and 2, we managed to secure round 3, and the award for that was 1.5 million. So we're just in the process of sorting the mechanics out around that. Huge amount for the newly unemployed. So we've been given funding for a Working Well Light, which is called Working Well Jets, and that is supporting kind of those kind of newer unemployed 3 months in, and also some adult education budget to support sector-based work academies. So a lot going on in that space. Page 97, we also just wanted to flag as well, and I think it's really important for Scrutiny here, keeping an eye on stuff. So actually, you know, we should be in a position now to use the data to really target those businesses, to use the partnerships, to use local authorities, to kind of really focus on the inequalities across the area, focus on the sectors that need us most, and so focus on the people that need us the most. And I think that's kind of what that slide says. And as you've said, Chair, we've done some heroic kind of, I'm not allowed to call them scenarios, Chair. They are kind of hypotheticals. But I think the conversation that we had at the Employment and Skills Advisory Panel yesterday, and I think for future kind of scrutiny, is what more can we do? We know it's coming. We know October is only around the corner. We know things will happen in December. We've done a huge amount, and like I say, I'll take that credit back to the team and the partnership. But also, how do we continue? So obviously the CSR asks are very much around this and around kind of securing a much more simpler adult and young person's schemes in Greater Manchester. We know that we've been able to pull things together. We know that devolution works, and we know that we've been able to do much more than having kind of siloed activity. And we know that we've really started to work with businesses in a very different way, asking them to translate their language of jobs so that we can then help the young people and the residents understand that pathway. So there's much more that we can be doing to try and stem that flow. But also, we also have to, you know, that we know the point, it is coming, and we will continue to work with the Department for Education and the Department for Work and Pensions as much as we possibly can. And then the final bit of the sections is just a bit of a showcase, just to give you a kind of sense of what is happening around things like GMAX, which has been before, which is around the young people, the development of the young person's guarantee, which is 11 to 30, which I've said has been led by Diane Medall. Some of the amazing case studies around work and health programmes and the support that's been given, and things that we've implemented ourselves in Greater Manchester to kind of fill some of the gaps. So I'll stop there, Chair.
Many thanks for that detailed explanation of the report, Gemma. Some really good stuff in there. I'll throw up now to questions. Any questions, please?
Yeah, we've got Councillor Meredith, Councillor Howarth and Councillor Rigby.
Right.
Thank you very much, Chair. So my quick question, well, quick observation first. I think it's brilliant, like the Chair said. I think it was very well explained and it was very well set out. My concern is obviously it's to do with the numbers, especially that are on page 99 in the table. So I just want to iron out that there's going to be no concerns with firing and rehiring. There's no one going to be taken off a job and put into an apprenticeship, which has happened in the past. So it's just around that, really. The other thing as well is obviously there's a lot of numbers to do in Manchester. I think it's about 3,000 or so. Will them jobs be open? Are we talking that the jobs that are just be in that in that Manchester area, and that people can obviously come in from like Rochdale and apply from and stuff like that? Are we actually just saying that that's what the employment increase is going to be in that area? The other thing as well, are we prepared for job seeking claimants within the city region? Are we prepared to obviously offer that advice? Are we prepared to get it, processed and through as soon as possible? Because there's going to be a lot of vulnerable people after October.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor. And I think you're absolutely right. The numbers that are stated there are kind of Greater Manchester, and the work that we do through the partnership and with our local authorities, to be honest, is, making sure that it's fair and equitable. I think your question around the what next, that's exactly right. How do we break down some of those silo barriers that are there to make sure that those people that are coming out can move into something? And that's our responsibility as Greater Manchester. The work that we do with JCP, the work that we do with your local authorities, making sure we're all giving a clear and consistent message. So that's the job that we try and do, and try and facilitate that. And it'll look different in different places, but trying to gather those knowledges about those vacancies. That's why we've used Employee GM, and a lot of your local areas are using that. They've adapted it, they've changed it, they've added to it to make sure that people know that, where we've got information, we're just trying to get it out as much as physically possible.
Sorry, can I just come back really quickly?
Yes, you can. Yes.
So just a quick guarantee that none of these figures that are in this report are going to be due to firing and rehiring, which I know that some employees have been doing during this COVID-19 outbreak.
Yeah, so we've tried to cleanse the data as much as possible, Councillor, and I think you're right, they are forecasts, so we cannot see. That's a kind of snapshot in time in terms of what things like the vacancies look like in that particular week. We've tried to cleanse it for kind of fake vacancies as well, because there's some very interesting things going on in the actual labour market and how people are kind of recruiting. So that's the best guess, I think, is all I can say at this moment in time. And I think work through things like the Good Employment Charter, things like the Kickstart Board, the more that we can do to prevent bad behaviour, the better for Greater Manchester. So this should be about quality and supporting our residents into those jobs that absolutely are there.
Thank you for that clarity.
Councillor Howarth. You're live, Councillor Howarth.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Chair. I want to ask about Kickstart. The programme that is very much based on training, working with employers for young people. There's this 6-month job offer, and of course alongside that there seems to be an access to jobs scheme with work coaches. You've done work there already in Oldham and Manchester, or rather DWP may have done. But in the round on all of this, will Greater Manchester put its effort into working with employers to secure jobs as a priority where we can? Do you think really it'll be jobs, it'll be sort of the mantra of jobs, jobs, jobs more than usual? Where do you think some of the skills strategy would possibly need to, some of it need to even be put to one side a little, so that you concentrate on those employment opportunities, almost filling a gap where you feel that there is a deficit on Kickstart? Thank you, Gemma and Sean.
Thanks, Councillor. I I think it's the right question to ask, and it was a discussion that we had yesterday. So just to kind of take you back, when the Chancellor announced this, GM has lobbied very, very hard, and my colleague Matt Ainsworth, who you know has been championing this, and Joanne Roney as well, is that we wanted a Greater Manchester response to this, to do exactly what you've asked for there, is that actually how do you generate those high quality jobs that have training, that have wraparound support, that also have something at the end of it? Because actually what you don't want to do is generate a cliff edge 6 months down the line and everybody then bounces onto benefits. So we had been very, very hard, along with the other mayoral combined authorities, to be honest, around, look, this cannot just be jobs, jobs, jobs. This has to be about, for the good of that young person and that young adult, what are they going to get out of it? So I think with the introduction of the board, that's the best that we can do at this moment in time, because we haven't got the kind of devolved or coordination powers that we'd have lobbied for. I think where we will get to with the intermediaries will act. So if you take the growth company, for example, lots of businesses have been coming to them to say, I've got a job or I can take one, and actually they collate them up into a kind of 30 jobs, and then they apply to DWP. They will also act as that kind of quality assurance as well. So by having a board with those intermediaries, you can set out the principles and the expectations of what Greater Manchester wants for those young people and for those jobs. And then the recovery plan and the skills strategy and all of that should be able to wrap around it. Because if you think about some of these young people, they will need more support. And what we should be doing as well is having a look at the data to see, is there a pathway that they could take? So the jobs have to be kind of no skills required, but actually you wouldn't want that. You would want to grow and develop and move people on and move them into something at the end. And that might be an apprenticeship, because that's a really good progression for them. So I think the more that we can come together as Greater Manchester with those intermediaries, the more chance we've got as it not just being jobs, jobs, jobs.
Yep. Any more questions?
We've got Councillor Rigby, Chair, and Councillor Bretherton.
Okay.
Right, thanks, Chair. It's on Kickstart, same as Councillor Howlett. When I looked in item 5, Kickstart was mentioned there, saying that it was going to be targeted to youth furthest away from employment. So when I picked up some local information back at theirs, which was the criteria is that stringent that it, for the level 2 and 3, I think it was, there was only 9 people eligible to be part of the Kickstart scheme. You could probably explain that to me quite easily. It's me misunderstanding it, but there's a definite anomaly there that we're aiming it at people in the outlying areas. And out of an area the size of Wigan, there's only 9 people who are eligible. So if you could, please.
Yeah, so on that, it's 16 to 24 on universal credit, and the referral will be made by Job Centre Plus. So I can't imagine that the numbers are that low. The 16, 17-year-olds would probably be very low. So it'll depend which figures maybe have been seen. So 16, 17-year-olds on universal credit are very, very low, but actually up to 24. And the difference with this scheme is they will be directly referred from Job Centre Plus, so they will manage that kind of referral process. So we will work with them about the numbers as much as possible. But I'm happy to pick up with your councillor and share kind of or have a further conversation about those figures, but I can't imagine that it's that low in Wigan, so it may just be the ages range.
Can I just come back?
Yep.
All it is that I had a chat yesterday and these figures were given to me. So if you could have a chat with Sharon back at Wigan and see where these figures came from, and is there a misunderstanding somewhere along, because it doesn't look like it's targeting where it's aiming, purporting to aim. Thanks.
That'd be very helpful if you could do that, Gemma, for Charles. It's something that clearly needs to be clarified. So I think there's one more question, isn't there?
Yes, Councillor Brooks.
Barry.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Yeah, my question's about the scenarios, if we're allowed to call them that, on pages 95 to 97. The three scenarios there give quite different forecasts for claimant rates in September, and we're in September now. So I just wondered if we had the figures, actual figures for September, how do they align with the scenarios? Do they indicate one scenario is more likely than another, or are they? Can we deduce anything from the actual numbers compared with the forecasts? Thanks.
Thanks, Councillor. We can update those figures actually. It was just the timings of the. I think we've been mildly optimistic in terms of the numbers. So it's not as many people are flowing on as some of those scenarios, which that's why we can't call them scenarios. But if we update the September ones, we can share those with the group, and then you can start to see. There's another group, and we work really closely with John Rathmell and his team around some of those forecasting, because actually we need to start to overlay, right, furlough, schools going back, unis going back, things closing, because actually that will all have a knock-on effect. So we've tried to do a static scenario, not scenario. But if we update the September ones, they aren't as bad as what we had envisaged. But that's not to say it's not coming.
Yeah. It'd be interesting to see those figures. Any final questions?
No, Chair, that's it.
Okay, well, I've got a couple. Page 98, and there's an analysis there of the various sectors, and they've been put into declining and slow growth, moderate growth, and high growth. What's the basis of this? Is this looking backwards, or is that looking forwards? In terms of the market intelligence that's presumably available, and if it's the latter, does it take into consideration, of some of the things we've been talking about recently? A good example being with manufacturing, which is a declining slow growth. Well, that could become high growth in the future, albeit not straight away. So I was, as I say, intrigued as to whether or not this is historic data or forecasted data.
Sorry, it is a little bit out of context actually. Sorry, I'm not live, I don't think, so I'll just wait until my box comes on. Yeah, there we go. So in terms of this, we've done a piece of work looking at who is recruiting. So what we were trying to do is look at the recruitment that was going on at this moment in time across Greater Manchester. And then that then helps us then with things like skills and work and the people side of things. So at that point in time, the declining growth sectors, and manufacturing was one that we actually thought, oh, that's a bit strange. They were the declining. So you would expect hospitality, retail, admin is really an interesting one as well, because actually we're all doing our own admin at home. So it's actually been quite slow in terms of recruitment. So it's the physical, which organisations are recruiting in Greater Manchester. It's based on actual data in terms of the labour market and those vacancies. So sorry that wasn't clear enough.
No, that's fine. And in that context, what you're saying, that I can probably understand most of that. But going forward, hopefully, it might be a completely different pattern. The other thing as well, I did note actually in your things to be done next, etc. The fact that you think we should be more market focused or the labour market focused in terms of what jobs are available, etc. And I think it's absolutely right. There's no point training up people for certain skills if there are no jobs available. And the other thing that I got is really as an observation really, and that's in relation to apprenticeships, which as you know, I've always been mad keen and supportive of. I think it's the way to learn. And I'm just wondering. I mean, it's clearly it's in your report and it's still key. Is there any thoughts as to whether this is going to accelerate? And I'm thinking now that the universities in a way have shot themselves in the foot. That by still charging the fees they charge, and yet lots of them just doing online, tutoring and everything else, and you aren't going to get the same quality of teaching as previously, and therefore are you getting value for money as an individual? So do you see, or is it too early to tell, a potential shift from university education into apprenticeships?
So I think it's an interesting question. I think my answer would be there is a place for everybody in that space, because you can't account for people's behaviour in terms of where they want to go. Universities people are still going, even though it will be a different style of learning. I think what we have seen is an absolute kind of decrease in the apprenticeship numbers, but you would expect to see that at the minute because people can't go into the workplace, they've not been able to go into college. What we've also seen is more people, and this is kind of is not factual at this moment in time, but more people going to an actual college setting as opposed to taking on an apprenticeship, because actually people are unsure about workplaces and things like that. So I think what we've got to do as a partnership is make sure that the message to apprenticeships is as clear as anything else, because like I said before, we're already seeing declines because people are doing Kickstart, for example. So it's going to be our responsibility, and we want to try and invest in that within the CA to kind of move that forward, and working with the department as well, because actually you're absolutely right, but the other added bit to that is T-levels comes on as well next year, so the technical education bit, which is why our GMAX is so important about getting those messages out to everybody, but mainly those young people that don't take the university route. What we're trying to do is give clarity to say these are the jobs, this is what the businesses have said, and you can take this route or you can take this route. Great. And they are equal standing.
That's excellent. I mean, that's a great answer, actually, and I think it's absolutely right, to go into different channels. Absolutely. Well, I'm fine on that. Then, as I say, we look forward to further updates. Again, lots going on. Absolutely. And at the end of the day, it's the thing that we must absolutely support is children's education, and they're the future of the country, and they're the ones being disproportionately affected, in my judgment, by what's going on at the moment. Obviously, health aside. So keep up the good work, and thank you, Sean, again for supporting Gemma and her team. It's always pleasing to see portfolio holders coming to these meetings. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks a lot. Right, so we're now on to the register of key decisions. That's just to note. I don't know if Simon, if there's anything you want to draw our attention to in this, in terms of any critical things that might be coming to the committee fairly shortly.
Sorry, Chair. Simon's just this minute had to leave, I'm afraid. He's got a meeting with the Mayor. So
okay.
Well, it was a little bit over.
If it's with the Mayor, we'll let him off. Would you want to add anything, Joanne, or that's a pretty unfair question to you, actually?
I have nothing to add, Chair.
Okay.
Yeah. So
in that case, we just note that. The next item on the agenda is the committee work programme. As you know, this is again a moving feast, and it's a living document, and we'll react to things as they arise. But it is there for noting again. The one thing I will point out is that Mary asked for the Force Society report to come earlier than I think when it was originally scheduled, which I think was March time, and that is now coming to the October meeting. which I presume that you're happy with that. So in that case, can we just note?
Sorry, Councillor Holly, Councillor Meredith would like to speak on the work programme, please.
Yeah, yes, I'm more than happy for Dan to speak.
Yeah, no worries. It's just a quick one, really. It's just to say that when we were talking about the, you know, the ethical employer charter, basically, whether that can be re-looked at in a future thing, obviously with, you know, with furloughing ending, and obviously the concerns with firing and rehiring going on currently in GM as well, just to make sure that, you know, that we are still sticking to it, and if it does need to be changed in any way or form at all. The other thing as well is that I wanted to quickly mention was obviously when I was speaking about Midas before, that obviously through the Growth Hub, it would be nice to see, I know that you said it's going to come in a year's time when it's been reviewed, but it'd be nice to see what actual Midas are doing and what our borough is paying into and actually getting out of that service. Thank you.
I don't know what, to be honest with you, what our responsibility is for scrutinising Midas, but I will look into it and come back to you. Okay, and the other item clearly been an ongoing update. So we know the programme, as I say, it will move from where it is because clearly there will be emerging issues as we go through this challenging year. So many thanks for your attendance. We got in eventually after some initial technical hiccups and some good questions, so I thank you for that. So keep safe, keep well, and we'll see you next month.
Yeah. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, Mike.